One introduction RAWSEP view the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only. For home building and furniture building, for just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lungs, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove, and International Convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.
Hi, my name is Lily. Andrew gave you the intro to Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates and their concern for air pollution from indoor residential wood burning. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, or RAWSEP, would like every near neighbor of an indoor residential wood burner whose wood smoke enters their yards and sickens the near neighbors to have a purple air PM 2.5 monitor hanging from the eaves of their home to measure the level of PM 2.5 entering their yards. That measurement of air pollution should be used as evidence of unnecessary air pollution, and each indoor residential wood burner should be shut down based on that evidence, one indoor residential wood burner at a time if necessary. The presentation by Andrew ended at 2 minutes 5 seconds. The same presentation by Emma starts at 2 minutes 3 seconds before the end of this podcast. So I am Lily, your timekeeper, and you can start the next podcast at 2 minutes 5 seconds in if you would not like to see the presentation by Andrew a second time. This presentation by me, Lily, ends at 5 minutes in. What you will see in the main content of this RAWSEP podcast will be news about air pollution from indoor residential wood burning and how that air pollution is being combated by ordinary people just like you who are unfortunately near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners at this time. There will also be news about unnecessary and highly polluting use of wood as fuel in industrial wood burners and preventable air pollution from wood burning wildfires. There will also be news about air pollution from PM 2.5 from gas-powered cars. There will also be news about airborne diseases which are also preventable with vaccines such as COVID-19 and measles and whooping cough, to name just a few. In 2025, Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates is also concerned with combating the Trump destruction of government funding for programs which protect human health through the Department of Health and Human Services, and Trump destruction of programs which fund the science and medical research plan to protect human health from preventable illnesses. Protecting human health is a patriotic act, and our defense against enemies is weakened if we are not as healthy as we can be. Heat pump rebates are now offered by the federal government, distributed through the eligible United States, are available in 2025, and are the best, cleanest, and now cheapest alternative to indoor residential wood burning if that burning is actually done to purportedly save money. Wind and solar as sources of the electricity that powers heat pumps and electric cars is also cheaper than burning wood. The adverse health effects that are caused by indoor residential wood burning also come at a cost to near neighbors, both in shortening and ending their lives, and in actual hospital, clinic, and funeral costs. Instead of being compensated monetarily, near neighbors should instead be able to achieve immediate relief by stopping indoor residential wood burning in their hyper-localized neighborhoods, which relief readings from purple air PM 2.5 monitors used as evidence of air pollution will help them achieve. Welcome to news about hopeful scientific and medical achievements that will also help us achieve the goal of clean air to breathe.
Episode 57DHXXF, September 7th. 2025 Firefighter is dying. Insurers doubt wood smoke is the cause. In episode 57DHXXF, 1 Left Wing Soft Secession, the opposite of a Marjorie Taylor Greene national divorce. 2 Trump imagines he loves the smell of napalm in the morning and posted that sentiment substituting the word napalm with the word deportations. 3 Air pollution from wood-burning firefighter battles health problems. If I live to 25, I have lived a good life. 4 Democrats the climate change playbook no longer works. What can activists do? 5 Wisconsin RAWSEP view working class Democrat Rebecca Poole versus incumbent. January 6th actor MAGA Republican Derrick Van Orden. From the article headline in the battle for Congress, working class Democrats try a hardscrabble pitch. 6 Air pollution from fossil fuel burning and wood-burning RAWSEP view wind power and solar power are clean alternatives to fossil fuels. Wind power as a competitor reduces profits for fossil fuel burning by Trump funders. From the article headline, Orsted Sues Trump Administration in fight to restart its blocked wind farm. 7 headlines main content. 1 Left Wing Soft Secession viewed by a Facebook poster as the opposite of the national divorce called for by right-wing MAGA Georgia U.S. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. RAWSEP view the left wing and the Democratic Party may softly secede to preserve public health. Marjorie Taylor Greene may crudely divorce the U.S. to proceed on an ignorant, unscientific path. There are many issues that the United States has to deal with that cross state lines such as air pollution. RAWSEP key. Excerpt Democrats prefer the terms resistance or federalism or uncooperative federalism. RAWSEP view this Facebook post has been extensively edited because the editor of RAWSEP does not view blue state lawsuits against the federal government to protect human health as dramatic as acts of secession. The author of this Facebook post also likes to equate the crude force of right-wing actions with opposite crude left-wing Democratic Party actions, which the editor of RAWSEP thinks is a crude comparison. Left-wing Democratic Party lawsuits are done in defense of many human rights which are being violated by the Trump presidency and Republican acquiescence to Trump, but it is logical to point out that blue states support the federal government financially while red states sap the strength of the United States with their general economic backwardness, as shown by red state poverty in relation to blue states' economic success and red state general resistance to science, technology, and other modern ideas which support research and outreach to ordinary people, which leads to supporting public health. Which are the U.S. states that contribute the most money to the federal government? Which are the U.S. states that are the poorest and contribute the least? RAWSEP key excerpt blue states are what economists call giver states. They send far more tax revenue to Washington than they receive back in federal investment. Blue states produce the majority of tax dollars that keep the federal government operational, while red states consume the majority of federal benefits. RAWSEP view is that the building of an alternate Centers for Disease Control (CDC) in 3 West Coast states is not being done quietly. It is being done out in the open. And those planning to protect public health in those blue states have nothing to hide. It is patriotic to look out for the health of your neighbors. If the Trump and RFK Jr. federal government shirks its duty to protect scientifically based public health, including researching mRNA cures for cancer and updating vaccines for diseases such as COVID-19, excerpts edited by RAWSEP residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization for brevity and clarity. Facebook post September 5th, 2025. What you might not realize is that the Marjorie Taylor Greene idea of divorce is already happening. Blue states just are not bothering to send the papers. It is called soft secession. RAWSEP key excerpt Democrats prefer the terms resistance or federalism or uncooperative federalism. From the Facebook post, it is about Democratic governors holding video calls to coordinate resistance attorneys general filing lawsuits within hours of federal orders, and RAWSEP interjects states building parallel systems as defense against an unscientific, inhumane system of Trump federal authority attempted to be installed within their borders. The Facebook post states that California sits on $1 billion in reserves and gets to decide how to deploy it. Illinois is exploring digital sovereignty. RAWSEP interjection of the definition of digital sovereignty in Illinois according to a website called Marketplace, published by the State Journal Register of Springfield, Illinois. Established in 1831, in August 2025, the Illinois General Assembly advanced a bill that could slow the Illinois crypto system, the Digital Assets and Consumer Protection Act (DACPA), which is consumer protection. RAWSEP interjection in the eyes of business, instead of the consumer back to the State Journal Register. DACPA would impose licensing requirements and regulatory authority over hundreds of Illinois startups of blockchain and cryptocurrency. RAWSEP views is that this as simple consumer protection and a needed reform of unbridled crypto industry that harms consumers economically. Although it may bring profits to shady businesses, protecting citizens from crypto fraud does not seem like resistance to the authority of the federal government. To RAWSEP back to the edited Facebook post, the conservative Supreme Court justices handed blue states the legal framework for this resistance. Prince versus United States means the federal government cannot force states to implement federal programs. Those conservative justices may not have thought that blue states would use their conservative legal precedents of the court to ignore federal authority. Blue states have been practicing soft secession for years. During the Trump first-term, Democratic attorneys general filed over 130 multi-state lawsuits with an 83% success rate. They maintain brief banks with pre-drafted lawsuits ready for immediate filing, the modern equivalent of how northern states coordinated legal resistance against fugitive slave laws. There is blue state economic. Blue states are what economists call giver states. They send far more tax revenue to Washington than they receive back in federal investment. Massachusetts sends $4,846 more per person or per capita to the federal government than it receives. New York contributed $142.6 billion more than it received over 5 years. The total transfer from blue to red states exceeded $1 trillion between 2018 and 2022. Blue states are subsidizing red states to the tune of $1 trillion. RAWSEP interjection: introducing a bill in a state senate or state assembly is not the same as passing a bill in a state senate or state assembly. From the Facebook post, Democratic lawmakers in Maryland, New York, Connecticut, and Wisconsin have introduced bills directing state officials to withhold payments to The federal government, if federal agencies act unlawfully or withhold funds previously appropriated by Congress, these are operational blueprints for financial defense. Northern states used personal liberty laws to make the Fugitive Slave Act virtually unenforceable between 1780 and 1859, with only 330 slaves returned despite federal law. What is different now is the scale and coordination. 3 sources on daily Zoom calls between Democratic attorneys general say the same phrase. Keeps coming up. Soft secession. Red states figured this out long ago. Texas has been practicing soft secession for decades, cherry picking which federal policies to implement. The difference is that blue states have more money and better lawyers. We are watching states walk away from each other. Blue states will protect abortion rights, support organized labor, and defend individual rights. And RAWSEP interjects that blue states, most notably, protect the climate and act to stop air pollution in order to protect the public health of all, because air pollution knows no borders. From the Facebook post, local officials must choose between federal directives and state law. The same dilemma Northern officials faced during the fugitive slave era. Democrats prefer the terms resistance or federalism or uncooperative federalism. Some states, such as California, Oregon, and Washington state, are building independent public health research and outreach systems that offer what the federal does not offer. In 2025, within their state borders, the leverage of blue states against the dictatorial Trump federal government is real. California alone sends over $500 billion annually to the federal government. What happens if the California Franchise Tax Board delays federal transfers? The Treasury starts bouncing checks. That is not how federal financing works in theory, but in practice cash flow matters. It is about math. Blue states produce the majority of tax dollars that keep the federal government operational, while red states consume the majority of federal benefits. If you are a liberal and live in a red state, you might want to consider moving. Why? Because blue states are saving themselves and those within their borders. RAWSEP interjection. Blue states are not just saving themselves and saving public health. The 3 West Coast blue states are saving the rest of the United States, since the North and South are not really divorced, no matter what Marjorie Taylor Greene may hope. Just as the blue state of California is saving the elections of 2026 by redistricting and asking other blue states such as Illinois and New York State to redistrict. Blue states at this point in history are showing their patriotism to the U.S. and its highest ideals on which the United States of America was founded. 2. Trump imagines he loves the smell of napalm in the morning and posted that sentiment, substituting the word napalm with the word deportations. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. For brevity and clarity, September 6, 2025. Heather Cox Richardson. Today, the social media account of President Donald J. Trump posted an AI-generated image of Trump as if he were Lieutenant Colonel Bill Kilgore from the 1979 film Apocalypse Now, in front of the Chicago skyline with military helicopters and flames, and the caption Chipacalypse. Now Kilgore loved the war in Vietnam, in which he was engaged. His most famous line was, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning." Over the image, the Trump social media post read, "I love the smell of deportations in the morning, Chicago." About to find out why it is called the Department of War. The words were followed by 3 helicopter emojis, symbols the right wing uses to represent the goons of the former Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet disappearing political opponents by pushing them out of helicopters. Although it has become trite to speculate about what Republicans would say if a Democratic president engaged in the behavior Trump exhibits daily, this open attack of the president on an American city is a new level of unhinged. Mehdi Hassan of Zedio wrote, "The president of the United States just declared war, actual military war, not a metaphorical one, on a major American city, and one governed by his political opponents." He added, "Accurately, in any other period this would be impeachment worthy." Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker called attention to the gravity of the Trump post. "The president of the United States is threatening to go to war with an American city. This is not a joke. This is not normal. Trump is not a strong man. He is a scared man. Illinois will not be intimidated by a wannabe dictator. The Trump threats against American citizens are outrageous, but they also feel desperate." The Trump popularity is tanking. The economy is faltering. Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. is facing a chorus of calls to resign or be fired, and the American people are taking to the streets. Thousands of people turn out today in Washington, D.C. for the We Are All D.C. march to protest the presence of troops in the city and in Chicago for the Chicago Says No Trump, No Troops protest. The protests are notable for the seas of signs the peaceful protesters carry. And then, with Congress back in session, there is the resurgence of the issue of the Trump appearance in the Epstein files. Last week, the White House warned Republicans that voting to release the Epstein files would be viewed as a very hostile act to the administration. Yesterday, Trump reiterated his claim that the agitation for the release of the files is a Democrat hoax in order to deflect and distract from the great success of a Republican president. Also yesterday, lawyers for the Justice Department asked a federal judge to keep the names of 2 associates who received large payments from Epstein in 2018. Secret days before the payments, the Miami Herald had started to examine the sweetheart deal Epstein got. In 2008, one associate received a payment of $100,000, and the second received $250,000 as part of his plea deal. Tom Winter of NBC News reports Epstein got a guarantee that the associates would not be prosecuted. Last night, Trump hosted the inaugural dinner of what the White House is calling the Rose Garden Club in the newly paved White House Rose Garden, telling those assembled that they were there because they are loyal to the president. "You are the ones that I never had to call at 400 in the morning," Trump told them. "You are the ones that have been my friends, and you know what I am talking about." Yesterday, talking to reporters about the Epstein files, House Speaker Mike Johnson, RLA, said that Trump was an FBI informant to try to take this stuff down. The idea that Trump was secretly working to bring Epstein down is common fare among conspiracy theorists, but as Josh Marshall of Talking Points memo suggests, the Johnson embrace of it might well be an attempt to spin material in the files before it becomes public. Marshall notes that journalist Michael Wolff, who interviewed Epstein at length during the Trump first presidency, says that Epstein suspected it was Trump who told the authorities about his systemic sexual assault of girls. But if so, Marshall explains, this is damning rather than exonerating. It is pretty well known that Trump and Epstein had a falling out in 2004 after Trump went behind the back of Epstein to buy an estate in South Florida that Epstein wanted, but at the time Trump was headed toward bankruptcy, and it was not clear where he was getting the money to buy the estate. Marshall calls attention to a recent interview in which Wolff said that Epstein suspected Trump was laundering money for a Russian oligarch, and indeed Trump did flip the property to a Russian oligarch for a profit of more than $50 million a few years after buying it, and threatened to sue Trump, bringing the money laundering to light. At that point, the Epstein investigation began. According to Wolf, Epstein believed Trump had notified the police about what was going on at the Epstein house, which he knew because he was a frequent visitor. Marshall speculates that Johnson mentioned that Trump was an informant because that information could well be in the files the Department of Justice has, and they're trying to spin it ahead of time to make it sound like Trump was a hero. But both Wolf and Marshall note that if indeed Trump turned the FBI onto Epstein, it shows he knew what was taking place at the Epstein properties. The Johnson claim that Trump was an FBI informant suggests the Trump team is worried that as more and more people get access to the files, it will be increasingly difficult to hide what is in them. The Trump demand for loyalty from Republicans suggests that at least some of them are starting to recalculate it, and that in turn might have something to do with why he is putting troops in the streets. 3. Air pollution from wood-burning firefighter battles health problems. If I live to 25, I have lived a good life. The New York Times. He started fighting wildfires as a teenager after inhaling smoke on the front lines for 6 seasons. He faced an impossible choice. Photo of Joel Eiseminger in Lakeview, Oregon, in September 2020. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP. Residents against wood smoke emission particulates of 501c3 nonprofit organization for brevity and clarity. The New York Times, September 7, 2025. Joel Eiseminger was racing to save homes in Northern California from a fast-spreading wildfire when a crewmate noticed that one side of his face was suddenly drooping so much that his mouth hung open. In his 6 years fighting fires, Joel had tumbled down burning hills, endured full-body rashes from poison oak, and inhaled plumes of smoke that left him gasping for weeks, but he had never felt as bad as he did on this morning in July 2024. He did not want to let down his crew, so he kept working deep in the forest until a medic told him to get to a hospital. He might have had a stroke as the doctors ran tests. Joel grew sicker within days. He was too exhausted to walk on the eve of his 25th birthday. He received a diagnosis: acute myeloid leukemia, an aggressive, often fatal blood cancer that usually strikes people more than twice his age. Joel told the doctors he was not a regular smoker and had no family history of blood cancers, but he did have one risk factor: his job. For decades, wildfire fighters have been sent to work in toxic smoke without masks or warnings about long-term health risks. The New York Times has reported they inhale poisons that are linked to more than a dozen kinds of cancer, including leukemia. Many are falling gravely ill, and some are dying at young ages. But when these firefighters get sick, they do not all receive the same help. About 2/3 of the 40,000 wildland firefighters in America work for state and federal agencies. By law, many of their cancers are assumed to be job-related, and their workers' compensation benefits are automatically approved. The other firefighters, about 14,000, are like Joel. They work for private companies that the government hires to shore up its ranks against a growing wildfire threat. Reliance on these contract crews has more than doubled since 2019 as climate change drives more extreme fire seasons. They have fought alongside federal workers in every major fire of the last decade. On the front line, all crews take orders from the same command structure and breathe the same smoke, but the laws that cover government workers do not extend to contractors to get benefits when they fall ill. Contract firefighters must prove that smoke exposure caused their cancer and all, but impossible tasks. Some go without needed chemotherapy and radiation, others take on so much debt their families become homeless. Some return to fighting wildfires even while sick at the hospital. Joel asked if he would be able to go back to work. The doctors tried to help him understand how urgent his situation was. Just in the days since he had arrived, the malignant cells had gone from undetectable levels to overwhelming. Without treatment, he would soon die. Even with medical interventions, only about half of patients survive a year. Joel needed immediate chemotherapy and blood transfusions. He would have to commute to a specialized hospital 5 hours away. He would get much sicker before he had a chance of getting better because the fire season had just started. The only money he had to fund any of it was from the paycheck he had just earned during his first night on the cancer ward. He opened an online message board popular with contract firefighters and posted a photograph of himself at the hospital, his boyish face partly hidden by the beard he had been growing out. This is my 6th season fighting wildfires, he wrote. I start chemotherapy tonight at 9 p.m. He asked for positive thoughts and urged others to stay vigilant about their health. Responses came in from strangers around the country. At Pacific Oasis, bosses talked about the inevitability of eating smoke and the need to suffer and execute. Joel occasionally thought about trying to work directly for the government, but his career as a contractor seemed to be taking off. Early last year, his boss Steve invited him to train as a crew leader who would oversee an entire 20-person team. It was one of the proudest moments Joel could remember, and he began to imagine spending his life working for the company. His mother, a care coordinator for veterans with cancer, struggled to understand how he could be out in all that smoke without a mask. Joel told her not to worry. I guess I thought I was invincible. He said the World Health Organization now says that firefighting can cause cancer, but many company owners remain dismissive about the long-term dangers of wildfire smoke. I am very skeptical, said Lee Miller, whose Miller Timber Services is among the largest U.S. firefighting companies. RAWSEP interjection of description of photos of other firefighters who are ill or have died after wildfire smoke exposure. R.J. McCadden was the father of Jason McCadden, a contract firefighter who died at 34 of cancer. Audrey Walzer, 45, got breast cancer after fighting wildfires for decades and had to skip chemotherapy. When Dwayne Boyd, 34, got testicular cancer, his workers' compensation claim was denied. Rick Minning was the husband of Beth Boatman, a longtime squad boss, died at 44 of lung cancer, leaving behind her husband and 2 daughters. RAWSEP interjection in a wild firefighter contractor point of view. Miranda Warren, vice president of the Northern Rockies Wildfire Contractors Association, said some in the industry were aware that smoke exposure can lead to illness, but she said, people are afraid to speak up because of fear of losing our contracts back. To the firefighter profiled in this article for Joel, the risks started becoming clear in the days after his first chemotherapy session last summer, he kept checking the replies to his post on the message board and was surprised to see that in addition to the notes of support, dozens of firefighters were sharing their own stories. I got diagnosed with cancer last October. Take care of yourself. First, the fires will always be there, wrote a 36-year-old in Nevada. I am almost at my 4-year cancerversary, wrote a firefighter in New York. You have got this. Another in California shared his diagnosis and wrote, after you are in remission, please consider positions where you will not be on the line. It will be better for your health. Joel had known he was taking some chances by becoming a firefighter, but had always felt like he was safe once he made it back to the Wild Goose with no injuries. Now he wondered if his illness was not random bad luck, but an almost inevitable consequence of decisions he had made when he was 18 years old. As Joel grew sicker, the bills started arriving: $880 for a blood test, $15,030 for an overnight stay. He hoped workers' compensation might cover some expenses. The government paid Pacific Oasis about $60 an hour for each firefighter. Some of that funded workers' compensation insurance, which covers medical bills and lost wages when workers are injured or fall ill because of their jobs. He went to Pacific Oasis headquarters to ask about filing a claim. He was too weak to drive, so his father Matt took him. They both remember the response of Steve the same way. There is no way that you can prove this is work-related. On the car ride home, Joel broke down. His father struggled to contain his outrage at Steve. I could not believe he had spent thousands of hours working with Joel, but at the first sign of trouble, he changed completely. Matt remembered Steve, 67, had his own frustrations. He sympathized with the plight of Joel and later said he was just trying to warn him that his claim was unlikely to succeed. Steve described himself as a hippie when he founded Pacific Oasis as a forestry company. Steve had only recently stopped leading fire crews himself and still believed strongly in universal health care, but he felt no responsibility for the illness of Joel. He doubted that wildfire smoke exposure caused cancer, especially in someone who had spent so few years in the job. Steve was focused more on immediate dangers like falling trees or chainsaw injuries. Cancer does not even make my top 10 list of worries, he said. He also had the concerns of a business owner. In the case of Joel, it might raise his insurance rates, already his largest expense behind payroll. Those who worked with him knew to expect both sides of his personality. He could be a paternal mentor who trained them and gave them second chances, but also a demanding boss who watched out for the bottom line. Still, Joel decided to pursue the benefits and, as required by law, began getting a portion of his lost wages. While the insurer considered his case, it was enough to pay for his parents to stay at a nearby motel. During his weeks-long treatments, Joel was one of the youngest patients on the cancer ward and was determined to stay strong. He walked laps with his 4-pole, logging miles each day. The nurses cheered him on, but they knew what was coming by his second stay in late August 2020. For he could barely leave his bed. One night he looked up the survival rate for acute myeloid leukemia. 70% of patients died within 5 years of diagnosis. For him, that would mean dying before he was 30. Wildfire smoke contains benzene, a known cause of acute myeloid leukemia, and studies have shown that firefighters die of blood cancers at higher rates. Dr. Curtis Lakowicz, who was an oncologist who treated Joel, said he tried to discourage firefighters in remission from going back to that work. Inhaling all those chemicals is not good for them, he said. Joel reluctantly decided to follow the advice of his doctor. He applied for a scholarship through a leukemia foundation to become an arborist. Having cancer has quickly taught me how precious life is and reminded me that every living thing can be lost if not cared for, he wrote. He spent September in and out of the emergency room with infections. His bones ached, and he was taking 15 pills a day to manage side effects from chemotherapy. One day a letter came from the insurer. Your work is not the major contributing cause of your claimed disease, it read. Joel was stunned. No more payments were coming. He had no savings left and months of treatment ahead. His family cut back on groceries and maxed out their credit cards. His mother started picking up overtime shifts with no money for his parents to stay nearby. Joel passed the time in the hospital playing online video games with friends from his crew. They teased him about losing his mountain man beard and called him their little bald baby. The treatment was working, but it left him depleted at home. He crawled the steps to his attic bedroom on his hands and knees. Hospitals were sending second and third notices of unpaid bills as the fall passed. He sometimes thought about how different it could have been if he had worked directly for the Forest Service. A 2022 federal law had given those firefighters automatic workers' comp benefits for many illnesses, including 14 cancers that Congress determined were linked to their smoke exposure. Similar legislation in Canada had included contract crews, but that did not happen in the United States. Joel could have appealed his insurance denial, but it is rarely possible to prove the cause of cancer. Other contractors and their families have tried. After 2 years in court, a firefighter in Ohio with testicular cancer is still appealing. The widow and children of a crew member in California who died of esophageal cancer lost their home while fighting for coverage in December. After the final round of chemotherapy for Joel, an envelope arrived from Pacific Oasis. Inside was a year-end bonus check for a few $100s and a note. I hope this reaches you in good health. Joel was relieved to be able to cover a bill or two as the family sank into debt. He had begun to imagine earning overtime again on the fire line. Hiring for the year usually began when the snow melted and involved a 45-minute hiking endurance test. He wondered if he could get strong enough to pass. Joel tried to hike again soon after the new year. At first, he took faltering steps and struggled to walk more than a few yards, but by the spring, he could make it to the ridge above town. His oncologist had told him he was in remission, but if the cancer came back, he would need a bone marrow transplant. He felt like he had only a brief window. I am dying anyway, so I might as well live, he told a contract firefighter friend who had just returned from the Los Angeles fires in March. His scholarship application to study to become an arborist was rejected. There were too many other qualified candidates, the letter said. A few weeks later, Joel and Matt went on a long uphill hike. Joel told his father what he now felt he had known all along. He was going back to firefighting. His father hesitated, but finally said, I know you love it. I guess I never realized how much I did. Joel said, at the end of the day, if I live to 25, I have lived a good life. He thought someone from Pacific Oasis might reach out about coming back, but no one did. He could not bring himself to get in touch. By July, a year after his diagnosis, he was looking farther afield. There were Forest Service jobs in Alaska, where more wildfires were burning than in the rest of the country combined. Soon, that became the plan. His parents bought a $600 plane ticket, paying $50 extra to make it refundable just in case 4 days before the flight Joel drove to Pacific Oasis. One last time, he needed his employment records to take to Alaska, but he also hoped that Steve might see him and decide to take him back in the office. Joel breathed in the familiar smell of wood chips and made a final appeal. I have been broke from the cancer. He said, I do not have $5. Steve said he was sorry, but the health problems of Joel meant the job was not a good fit. Anymore, it is just life, he said. Joel put his motorcycle in storage, packed his fire bag, just as he always had, and spent his last day in Oregon trout fishing with Matt. His fingers were stiff, a lingering effect of his illness. So his father tied the bait. The next morning, he turned 26. His grandmother called to wish him a happy birthday. She did not know he was about to catch a flight, and she asked if he had any fun plans. It felt like everything, his broken body, the debt, the uncertainty ahead was landing on him at once. He stared for a while at the door, then pulled on his sunglasses and walked out to the truck. His father followed behind. Let us go, buddy, he said softly. Outside, Joel could see smoke rising from the hills behind town. Dozens of large fires were burning across the country. Soon he hoped he would be out on one of them. Image of a man in sunglasses sitting among people in an airport. Joel waiting for his flight to Alaska, where more wildfires were burning than in the rest of the country combined. For Democrats, the old climate activism playbook no longer works. What else can? Activists are hoping to recreate the magic of the 1970 Earth Day at a moment when the future of the movement is cloudier than ever. RAWSEP view Bill McKibben publicizes Sunday set for September 21st, 2025 as a National Day of Activism. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP residents against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. For brevity and clarity, the New York Times, September 5, 2025. At the end of a long dirt road through the Green Mountains of Vermont, Bill McKibben sits on a porch with an array of solar panels tilted toward the late morning sky. The roof, too, was loaded with solar panels of different vintages. I have been putting them up at intervals for a quarter century, he said. Few climate activists have participated in more eras of the environmental movement than McKibben. In 1989, at age 27, he published The End of Nature, often described as the first book on global warming for lay readers, which became an international bestseller. Then, he turned to activism, eventually shifting his focus from combating the greenhouse effect to organizing pipeline protests and fossil fuel divestment campaigns. Over the decades, he has evolved from a concerned observer to an elder statesman of the climate movement. I met McKibben at a uniquely bleak time for that movement. Republicans in Congress had shredded the Inflation Reduction Act, a Biden administration law meant in part to lower greenhouse gas emissions, and President Trump was making every effort to thwart progress on renewables while boosting the oil and gas industry. The president had also pulled the United States out of the Paris Agreement, a climate accord that advocacy groups had helped catalyze. In certain ways, it is the darkest moment. McKibben said he had been coping by throwing himself into a new project. On September 21st, 2025, McKibben will spearhead a national day of action called Sunday, for which activists across the country are organizing local events to hype up solar power and energy-efficient innovations. There will be electric car shows, open houses at all electric solar homes, and solar installation tours. In August, McKibben also published a book on solar and wind power called Here Comes the Sun. He wants to convince Americans that renewable energy is not a pricey boutique alternative, but the accessible, abundant, cost-effective future of electrified life. No longer the Whole Foods of energy, as he put it, but the Costco. With Sunday, McKibben hopes to recapture the spirit of the first Earth Day in 1970, the earliest wide-scale mobilization of the environmental movement, which helped catapult issues like pollution and conservation onto the national agenda. Like Earth Day, McKibben told me, Sunday is meant to be a giant potluck supper for activists around the country. We have set the date and the theme, and everyone is bringing their own dish to the floor. In some ways, focusing on renewable energy right now is a logical bet. In March, the United States hit a new milestone when fossil fuels generated less than half of American electricity. In June, solar was the largest source of electricity for the European Union for the first time ever. Last year, over 90% of new power globally came from clean energy sources. The United Nations announced in July that solar power is now on average 41% cheaper than fossil fuels. For the very first time in this saga, the force of economic gravity is working in the right direction. McKibben said his hope is that engaging people in small ways where they live could hasten the clean energy transition that is already underway in the U.S. But Sunday also feels like a tactical swerve for McKibben. Climate activism over the past decade has been defined by global protests against fossil fuels, by the Greta Thunberg student strikes, by the emergence of the Sunrise Movement. McKibben has been among the strongest exponents of the climate activism strategy of that era, confrontational, morally stark, bent on shutting down economic activity that endangered humanity in the long term, even if it meant reducing corporate profits and curtailing American lifestyle options in the short term. Now McKibben is taking a different tack, one that seems to share a message with a more moderate adaptationist wing of the climate world, while also harking back to the innocence and idealism of Earth Day. This is clearly the thing that we can work on at the moment that stands a chance of making a difference, he told me. His own shift in strategy comes as many activists are asking themselves some difficult questions. What has climate activism really given us? And where should it go from here? In a Gallup poll this year, a record 48% of respondents said that global warming will pose a serious threat to them or their way of life. People can feel the hotter summers, the snowless winters, the hurricanes raging harder. Some surveys have found evidence among Republicans, too, of a willingness to link extreme weather to climate change. Yet when asked to rank the issues that affect their votes, Americans regularly place climate near the bottom of the list. And so for many people who are passionate about the climate threat, recent years have inspired a difficult reckoning about the power of climate activism and its limits. For all the work McKibben was putting into Sunday, he is not sure if it will continue beyond this year. If it does, someone else may have to lead it. I am getting old, he told me, but he is far from alone in trying to figure out a path for the climate movement. Neubauer told me that young activists have been asking her lately how they can recapture the excitement of the student strikes before the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead of trying to get back to 2019, she wants them to think of imitating the years before the climate student strikes. What were activists doing in that time of less momentum when Trump was elected and Brexit passed and wildfires decimated Europe? We need to fight the cynicism a bit more effectively than we are doing right now, Neubauer said. Prakash, meanwhile, believes that the first-hand experience of extreme weather is what will urge people to political action the way oppressive pollution did in the lead-up to Earth Day. The question for the climate movement in the next decade, she said, is not just how to limit warming as much as possible, but how to help communities recover from natural disasters as they come with greater frequency and ferocity. She feels encouraged by some new projects like the Make Polluters Pay campaign, which seeks to sue fossil fuel companies for damages in proportion to their contribution to emissions. She thinks it may be the 2020s version of the divestment campaigns of the 2010s. Prakash sees potential too in the Sunday economic argument for solar and wind. I think it is an interesting experiment, she said, in trying to take the fight around renewable energy to a wider audience than just the climate left. As McKibben and I wound through the mountain roads in his Kia dense foliage crowding in on the pavement, he recalled the exact moment when he decided to start planning Sunday in earnest last summer. He watched the solar eclipse from the Middlebury campus smack dab in the path of totality. It had been a while since he had seen the student body so excited. It was the biggest event in Vermont in ages, McKibben said. He stood there on the quad and took it in, hundreds and hundreds of students craning their faces upward, wrapped happily. McKibben said they had a deep affection for the thing, the sun we most need to get us out of the jam we are in. 5 Wisconsin RAWSEP view working-class Democrat Rebecca Poole versus incumbent January 6th actor and MAGA Republican Derrick Van Orden. From the article headline, in the battle for Congress, working-class Democrats try a hardscrabble pitch. The New York Times, a new crop of candidates has turned away from the aspirational American dream message of campaigns past and is leaning into how difficult life can be for working people, including them. Dan Osborne poses for a portrait at his home in Omaha, Nebraska on Sunday, July 6th. 2025, Osborne is expected to announce that he will run for U.S. Senate as an independent. Rebecca Cook, Democratic candidate for the 3rd Congressional District in Wisconsin, attends a candidate forum May 1st, 2024 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Graham Plattner shucks oysters on site of the farm. He runs with another person in Waukee Neck Oyster Company. In the Frenchman Bay, Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate Nathan Sage speaks with Unity Point nurses after a rally calling for union representation on August 20th, 2025 in Des Moines, Iowa. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP. Residents Against Wood Smoke Emission Particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization for brevity and clarity. The New York Times, September 7th, 2025. When Rebecca Cook introduces herself to voters in western Wisconsin, she notes how rough she and her working-class family had it when she was growing up. In high school, we had to sell our cows because of the price of milk in competition with other dairies. Ms. Cook, who is challenging Representative Derrick Van Orden, a hard-right Republican, said at a recent town hall. Bob Brooks, a retired Bethlehem firefighter who is running against Representative Ryan McKenzie, a Republican in a Pennsylvania district that is one of the most competitive in the country, makes a similar pitch. Describing how he was raised by a single mother who worked as a bartender, pizza delivery, dishwasher, bartender, drove a beer truck, landscaper, coached baseball, and yeah, I was a firefighter, is how Brooks laid out his biography in his campaign launch video. Even that sounds coddled and comfortable compared to the life story of Nathan Sage, a car mechanic who was raised in a trailer park in Mason City and is now running an outsider campaign for Senate in Iowa in a populist moment when voters are angry at a government that many believe has failed them at every turn. A slew of working-class Democratic candidates are entering competitive congressional races across the country with an appeal that appears aimed at being relatable, if not particularly uplifting. Our lives are just as difficult and infuriating as yours. Gone is the aspirational American dream narrative that has long been a staple of political campaigns for lawmakers in both parties, and these working-class candidates bear little resemblance to the kinds of people Democrats have turned to in recent years to win elections when they have recruited educated professionals with sterling pedigrees, including prestigious national security credentials. These candidates are not trying to persuade voters that if you who work hard and play by the rules you will be able to get ahead. Their message is that they, like the people they are seeking to represent, are working too hard for too little and still struggling. Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has made it clear that finding candidates who can win general elections remains his North Star regardless of their background. He has focused this year on recruiting candidates who he trusts know how to win statewide races, including at least one with working-class bona fides. Former Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, who was defeated last year and has announced he will attempt to come back in 2026 by running in a special election for the seat formerly held by Vice President J.D. Vance. It is also still early in the cycle for the Democratic campaign arm to make any official endorsements, but Democratic Party leaders also are not planning to back. Dan Osborne, who worked as industrial mechanic at the Kellogg plant in Omaha, he is running again for Senate after significantly outperforming former Vice President Kamala Harris last year in an unexpectedly competitive race against Senator Deb Fischer, a Republican. The campaign arm works to elect Democrats, and Osborne is running as an independent on the House side. Democrats have been embracing some of the working-class candidates. Carnes said working-class people are less likely to be able to run for office because it is time-consuming and costly to do so. Even party leaders who like workers know it is harder for them to run, and they have finite resources. He said they know it will take more of their resources to support a worker candidate, and they are facing pressure to find the low-hanging fruit, a candidate who is going to have an easy time running. Carnes said people become distrustful of democracy when it seems that elected office is off limits to working people. If we keep an entire class of people away from our legislative institutions, they are not going to do a very good job understanding the problems of working people. He said there have been some groups trying to create infrastructure for working people to run for office, including unions in Nevada and New Jersey that train workers to run for office. And after the 2024 election, a group of veteran consultants from the campaigns of Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona, as well as those of Osborne and Sanders, decided to invest in new types of candidates to help the party move in a different direction. They started Fight Agency, which has helped launch a number of campaigns for working-class candidates this cycle, including those of Brooks, Plattner, Osborne, and some other candidates running populist campaigns. Some of the current crop of working-class candidates are running again after coming close 2 years ago. Ms. Cook ran for Congress in 2024 and lost to Van Orden by less than 3 percentage points. Rebecca Cook outperformed Ms. Harris by roughly 9,000 votes, and Senator Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat, by about 5,000 votes in a southwestern Wisconsin district that includes Eau Claire. Still, working-class candidates remain rare, even if it seems like there are more than usual who are gaining some early traction. What we count as a lot, Karn said, is still really low. 6. Denmark and Rhode Island and Connecticut air pollution from fossil fuel burning and wood-burning RAWSEP view wind power and solar power are clean alternatives to fossil fuels wind power, as a competitor reduces profits for fossil fuel burning by Trump funders. From the article headline, Orsted Sues Trump Administration in Fight to restart its blocked wind farm. The New York Times, Orsted Sues Trump Administration in Fight to restart its blocked wind farm. The Danish company behind Revolution Wind, a $6 billion project off Rhode Island, said the federal government had unlawfully halted work on the wind farm. Photo as the white blades of a wind turbine spin against a gray cloudy sky as a group of onlookers on the top deck of a nearby ship take photos. A tour of an Orsted-operated wind farm off the coast of Block Island, Rhode Island in 2022. Excerpts edited by RAWSEP residents. Against wood smoke emission particulates, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. For brevity and clarity, the New York Times, September 4, 2025. Orsted, the Danish renewable energy giant, sued the Trump administration on Thursday, saying the Trump move to halt a nearly finished wind farm off Rhode Island was unlawful and issued in bad faith. The administration last month took the remarkable step of ordering work to stop on Revolution Wind, a $6.2 billion offshore wind farm that was nearly 80% complete, as part of a campaign to block wind projects. On Thursday, Revolution Wind, LLC, a joint venture between Orsted and Skyborn Renewables, asked the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia to prevent the administration from enforcing the stop work order. The complaint alleges that the order was arbitrary and capricious, in part because it appeared to be carried out under political pressure from the White House. The Attorneys General of Connecticut and Rhode Island also said that they would file a separate lawsuit Thursday in the United States District Court for Rhode Island to overturn the stop work order. The 65-turbine Revolution Wind project had obtained financing, as well as all necessary permits from the Biden administration. Construction began in 2023, and the developers had said it was on track to produce enough electricity for more than 350,000 homes in Rhode Island and Connecticut by next spring. In their complaint, the developers said that they had already spent $5 billion on the project and would incur another $1 billion in financial penalties from failing to complete it, while also losing billions of dollars in future revenue if the project was canceled. A spokeswoman for the Interior Department, the parent agency of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, said it did not comment on pending litigation. President Trump has been a vocal critic of wind firms for years, calling them ugly and inefficient. His administration has sharply escalated its attacks on the wind industry in recent months, moving to block not just future wind projects, but also projects that have already been permitted and under construction. In April, the Interior Department ordered that work be stopped at Empire Wind, a $5 billion wind farm off the coast of New York that had received all necessary approvals from the Biden administration and was already being built after several weeks of negotiations with Gov. Kathy Hochul, Democrat of New York. The administration allowed Empire Wind to proceed. White House officials suggested they had done so only after Ms. Hochul agreed to approve new gas pipelines in the state. She denied that any such deal had been made. Equinor, the Norwegian energy giant that was building Empire Wind, never ended up suing the administration over the month-long pause. The company had warned that it was losing nearly $50 million per week while the project was halted, and that it might have to abandon it altogether if the stop work order continued for much longer. Orsted is taking legal action more rapidly. The Danish government owns a 50.1% share in the company, which saw its stock price plunge to record lows last month after the stop work order. Denmark and the United States have repeatedly been at odds under the Trump administration, with Denmark rejecting the Trump insistence that the United States take over Greenland. Last month, Denmark summoned the head of the U.S. Embassy in Copenhagen after allegations that 3 Americans with ties to President Trump were running covert influence operations in Greenland. In a statement, the developers behind Revolution Wind said that the project is facing substantial harm from continuation of the stop work order, and as a result, litigation is a necessary step. Gov. Ned Lamont, Democrat of Connecticut, said he was willing to work with the administration, but it had not justified its decision to halt construction, and that the state was acting to preserve this vital project and protect the energy future of Connecticut and the entire New England region. Some legal experts have said that there is little basis for blocking projects that have already received permits. On Wednesday, the Trump administration said in another court filing that it planned to revoke federal approvals for the New England wind project about 20 miles south of Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Construction has not yet begun, but if completed, it would be one of the largest offshore wind projects in the country. Scientists have said there is no evidence to link wind farms to whale deaths. 17 states and the District of Columbia have sued the administration over the Trump halting of federal approvals for wind projects. The lawsuit filed in Massachusetts federal court argued that the move violated the Administrative Procedure Act and harmed the efforts by states to secure energy and fight climate change, while jeopardizing billions of dollars in investments. The Alliance for Clean Energy New York, a coalition of environmental and clean energy industry groups, later joined the suit as a plaintiff in July. Judge William G. Young narrowed the case, but allowed it to proceed. A hearing was set to be held on Thursday afternoon. 7A headlines. The New York Times, September 7, 2025. Air pollution from fossil fuel burning and wood burning. RAWSEP view head of Trump Energy Department is former fracking executive. From the article headline, Energy Secretary attacks offshore wind and dismisses climate change. The New York Times, air pollution from fossil fuel burning and wood burning. RAWSEP view wind power and solar power are clean alternatives to fossil fuels. From the article headline, the Trump administration wants to switch off climate satellites. The New York Times, air pollution from fossil fuel burning and wood burning among the causes of climate change. Climate change oceans, what the future ocean might look like amid climate change, overfishing, and more. The New York Times, air pollution from wood burning. RAWSEP view in earlier article in support of the story today of one firefighter sickened by fighting fires without a mask. From the article headline, wildfire fighters unmasked in toxic smoke are getting sick and dying. The New York Times, astronomy, blood moon, where and when to see the blood moon and total lunar eclipse. The New York Times, consumers flights. RAWSEP view how airlines make profits. From the article headline, why frequent flyer programs have become essential to many airlines. The New York Times, consumers, older people. RAWSEP view prescription drugs may be a reason for more Deaths of older people after falls from the article headline, Why are more older people dying after falls? The New York Times consumers reading 21 new nonfiction books. To read this fall, the New York Times Democrats' RAWSEP view lessons about the working class depiction media film violence from the article headline, The Cut Review, the grisly comeback of a boxer. The New York Times Democrats' RAWSEP view lessons about the working class. Working class depiction media film violence from the article headline, The series named Task brings more murder and flattened vowels to HBO. The New York Times Democrats. If redistricting goes as expected, which party will come out ahead? The New York Times consumers cleaning 9 somewhat unexpected cleaning tips from our experts. Reviews by Wirecutter consumers. Clothing RAWSEP view, the outdoors food from the article headline. Patagonia changed the apparel business. Can it change food too? The New York Times consumers crypto crime RAWSEP search for AI overview. Silk Road can refer to the illegal dark web marketplace that operated from 2011 to 2013, a 2021 movie about the dark web marketplace, or the Silk Road online MMORPG, and its mobile version from the article headline, The Spectacular Comeback Tour of Ross Ulbricht. The founder of Silk Road. The New York Times consumers lottery Powerball hits $1.8 billion. Here are the 10 biggest U.S. lottery jackpots. The New York Times consumers planning reading our 6 favorite paper planners of 2025. Reviews by Wirecutter consumers. Tennis alternatives for amateurs. Pickleball courts taking over tennis courts as seen from the sky. The New York Times human interest ask Wirecutter, why cannot my partner see how right I am? Reviews by Wirecutter Media. Cartoons fighting the power. One political cartoon at a time. The New York Times medicine and science RAWSEP view, a preventive solution to brain injury during full contact football from the article headline. Opinion, the future is flag football. The New York Times nature, get to know the ratfish and the forehead teeth it uses during sex. The New York Times New York City mayoral race, Bernie Sanders to host Zoran Mamdani at Fighting Oligarchy event in Brooklyn. The New York Times religion RAWSEP view, human interest in moral or ethical lessons from examples of humane acts on earth during the lives of saints, including a 15-year-old boy. This time from the article headline, Pope Leo XIV declares 2 saints, including Carlo Acutis. The New York Times Republicans Trump actions, Trump tramples the power of Congress with little challenge from the GOP. The New York Times Republicans Trump actions RAWSEP view, Trump takes credit for infrastructure improvements in red states due to funding from the Biden Democrat passed infrastructure bill. From the article headline, Trump tried to kill the infrastructure law, now he is getting credit for its projects. The New York Times Trump actions RAWSEP view, the idea of war on Venezuela plus the idea of changing the Department of Defense DOD to Department of War DOW. From the article headline, opinion, it does not seem wise to let Trump decide what war is. The New York Times Trump actions RAWSEP view, this particular hypocrisy ends actions speak louder than words. From the article headline, President of Peace Department of War and new name sends mixed signals. The New York Times Trump actions opinion, stop funding the Trump takeover. The New York Times Trump allies Nazis RAWSEP view, Germany neo-Nazi Trump ally strategies. Illuminated media film from the article headline, review of the new film named Riefenstahl, the favorite filmmaker of Hitler, is revisited. The New York Times Trump extortion of universities at Harvard, the ruling of a judge on funding gives students one more thing to ponder. The New York Times Europe and America opinion, America cannot match China without allies. The New York Times France RAWSEP view, an election is being held September 8, 2025. From the article headline, Why financial woes in France are pushing its government to the brink. The New York Times Ukraine for Americans in Ukraine, opportunity and the lure of combat. The New York Times Ukraine-Russian strike breaks through most protected part of Kyiv. The New York Times Japan Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba of Japan says he will step down. The New York Times South Korea negotiates release of Korean workers detained in Georgia raid. The New York Times 7B headlines, The Guardian September 7, 2025 Democrats New York City mayoral race. We have the people. Bernie Sanders campaigns with Zoran Mamdani as New York mayoral race enters final stretch. New York, The Guardian Trump actions RAWSEP view, September 7, 2025 tennis game attendance. Trump was booed at the 2015 U.S. Tennis Open final. Booing will not be televised this time in 2025. From the article headline, broadcasters told not to air any booing of Donald Trump at U.S. Open final for men. U.S. Open Tennis 2025, The Guardian Trump actions RAWSEP view, September 7, 2025 tennis game attendance. Trump was booed at the 2015 U.S. Tennis Open final. Booing will not be televised this time in 2025. From the article headline, The U.S. Tennis Association USTA censorship of Trump dissent at the U.S. Open is cowardly, hypocritical, and un-American. U.S. Open Tennis 2025, The Guardian Trump economy, Donald Trump maelstrom likely to leave U.S. economic model unrecognizable. Heather Stewart, The Guardian Trump economy Europe RAWSEP view, Europe is affected by the failing Trump economy. From the article headline, The Trump war on Fed is serious danger to world economy, says the European Central Bank head. ECB head Donald Trump. The Guardian Trump and Epstein fallout, no outreach to Epstein victims despite the Trump vow to investigate, lawyers say. Jeffrey Epstein. The Guardian Trump military RAWSEP view, ceremony to honor Tom Hanks canceled. Trump actions versus Democrats. Tom Hanks starred in the Apollo 13 film about a failed Jim Lovell spaceflight. From the article headline, Tom Hanks pays tribute to Apollo 13 astronaut Jim Lovell. U.S. News, The Guardian Trump military RAWSEP view, ceremony to honor Tom Hanks canceled. Trump actions versus Democrats. Tom Hanks starred in the Apollo 13 film about a failed Jim Lovell spaceflight. From the article headline, Trump tariffs U.S. Postal Service disruption. Postal traffic into U.S. plunges by more than 80 after Trump ends exemption. U.S. News, The Guardian United Kingdom Liberal Prime Minister Keir Starmer 1 leaders learn that groveling to Trump leads to disaster. When will it dawn on Starmer? Simon Tisdall. The Guardian Ukraine Blackwater founder and MAGA disciple Eric Prince pitching services in Ukraine. The Guardian South Korea 300 South Koreans detained at Hyundai plant in U.S. to be released, says Seoul U.S. immigration. The Guardian cat's corner strategy with Tiger and Leone saying the quiet part out loud. Roar. Hi, I am Tiger. Our human asked us to get up from our naps and start Cat's Corner strategy with Tiger and Leone. She gave us a list of internet allies which we will post for her here.
Hi, I am Leone. It is better for your mental fitness to go to these websites than to go to bro sites for advice. Substack letters from an American Heather Cox Richardson. Substack your local epidemiologist. The Midas Touch. The Guardian. The New York Times.
One introduction. RAWSEP view: the United States government was on track in the Biden administration to reduce the prices for both clean energy heat pumps and clean energy electric cars. Trump tariffs are expected to upset those plans to prevent future air pollution and prevent climate change. The United States government should, instead of certifying wood stoves as safe when they are not safe, go forward with regulations that ban wood stove use and direct government money for use of forest refuse only for home building and furniture building. For just a few examples of use of forest products for non-burning uses, it is well known from scientific and medical research that wood burning is a substantial source of PM 2.5 emissions, yet the wood burning industry uses the scientifically debunked theory named carbon neutrality of wood burning to argue that wood burning replacing coal burning in industry, and in a trickle-down argument that wood burning should continue for home heating should continue. Presumably because it is called renewable, wood may be renewable in the sense that a tree can be planted in the place of a cut-down burned tree, but it takes centuries or decades for the newly planted tree to attain the stature of the cut-down burned tree. During those centuries or decades, photosynthesis, which converts CO2 to oxygen, and so sequesters some carbon, will not take place at the same rate as photosynthesis was performed previously, and wood burning emits both CO2 and PM 2.5, and PM 2.5 is not absorbed by trees, so PM 2.5 is not diminished by planting a tree in the place of a cut-down and burned tree. In fact, a living tree closes its pores against the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning, just as humans hold their breath in the presence of PM 2.5 from nearby wood burning. And when a tree closes its pores, the level of photosynthesis that absorbs CO2 pollution goes down. Wood burning emits 90% PM 2.5 particulate matter of 2.5 micrometer size, the perfect size to infiltrate the human lung, setting off a cascade of human health problems and early deaths. Contrary to many beliefs, wood burning emits 2.8 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel coal burning, and wood burning emits 450 times the PM 2.5 as the fossil fuel natural gas burning. Replacing coal burning with wood burning creates more air pollution in the form of CO2 and PM 2.5 than coal burning. This emission data comes from testing the cleanest burning wood stove in the United Kingdom, the Eco-Design Wood Stove. An international convention does not count the emissions from wood burning. The emissions from wood burning are erased from all countries around the world when calculating if each country has met its climate goals. This non-counting or erasure of wood burning emissions data from climate goals does not mean wood burning emissions do not exist. RAWSEP view: purple air PM 2.5 monitors hanging from the eaves of the house of a near neighbor should be used to measure the level of PM 2.5 in the air hyperlocally in the yards of near neighbors of indoor residential wood burners. If PM 2.5 levels exceed World Health Organization standards of 5 micrograms per cubic meter annually, then that evidence of air pollution from wood burning should lead to the shutdown of that indoor residential wood burning appliance, one appliance at a time if necessary.